If you want to learn to be more assertive, you're going to want to know your list of assertiveness rights. Now, this list was developed in the 70s by a doctor named Manuel Smith. And his ideas have more or less been incorporated into assertiveness trainings worldwide. But I have here an unembellished list of his original assertive rights, and there's 10 of them. And once you understand in a simple way what you're allowed to say to other people without being a bad person, then you will become more free and more autonomous and more capable of saying what you want and making your own decisions, because you will be empowered by this list of rights that you have as a human being to, what they all boil down to is be the ultimate judge of your own behavior. And so no longer will you need to defer to other people to make decisions for you, or feel guilty or obligated to other people to do things that you don't actually want to do. Now, all of the assertive rights in this list center around this first one. And the first one is you have the right to judge your own behavior, thoughts, and emotions, and to take responsibility for their initiation and consequences upon yourself. You have the right to judge your own behavior, thoughts, and emotions. You are the ultimate judge of you. You are the one that decides what's right and what's wrong. And as long as you're not breaking the law, you have that right. You can decide what is right and wrong according to your standards. But most of us were taught early in life to respond to psychological manipulation tactics. We're made to feel guilty to do the things that other people want us to do. Like we should do them. Like a good person does them. Like a responsible person does them. But none of this stuff is true. And what's more, not only did we learn to respond to it, we learned to do this to other people. It's so enmeshed in our way of being and our way of interacting with the people around us that we don't even know when we're doing it to other people. So no longer do you have to respond to an arbitrary list of rights and wrongs, or goods and bads, or shoulds imposed on you by other people. If you ever find yourself saying, I feel like I should do this thing even though I don't really want to do it, there's a good chance that you feel guilty and that you should do this thing because someone else wants you to do it, because you feel like you're going to let them down, because you feel like a good friend would do it, or a good son or daughter would do it, or a good citizen would do it, or a good boss would do it, or a good colleague or coworker or employee would do this thing. And so you find yourself spending all your time doing things you don't want to do, putting everyone else's needs above your own, and ultimately being taken advantage of in many personal and professional situations. Okay, so I'm going to repeat that first one. First one is you have the right to judge your own behavior, thoughts, and emotions, and to take responsibility for their initiation. So you're sharing your thoughts, opinions, emotions, and acting on your own will and being yourself and behaving. You are the one that initiates those things, right? No one else is going to do that stuff for you. If you have something to say, ultimately, you got to say it. It's up to you. You can't put it in the hands of other people. But you also take the consequences upon yourself. If you do something that defies a sort of well-defined social norm, then there might be some consequences. There might be an impact upon your relationship, or the relationships that you've established, that you have pre-existing agreements in all your relationships. You've behaved a certain way. Maybe you've always been there for your boss whenever he needed you to pick up extra time, and this time when he calls, you say no. Yes, he is going to be let down. And there's going to be a consequence to that, but realistically, he's not going to probably, he or she, is probably not going to treat you differently. They're probably going to have more respect for you. And it might not seem like that, but it will ultimately be true. Okay, so number 2, you have the right to offer no reason or excuses for justifying your behavior. So you don't need a reason for what you're doing. And oftentimes, people will inadvertently try to manipulate you into feeling bad by saying, why did you do that thing? Why did you behave that way? And you'll be like, well, I don't know why I behave that way. I feel like I need to come up with a good reason that's acceptable to you so that I'm not a bad person, and explain to you why I did what I did, but you don't have to do that. If someone comes to you and they say, why did you break the vase? You don't need to come up with a good reason why you broke the vase. If you drank the last LaCroix out of the fridge, and you say, why did you do that? If you loved me, you wouldn't do that. Well, you don't have to have a reason that's acceptable to them. And if they think that what you did was wrong, a good partner wouldn't drink the last LaCroix out of the fridge. Well, you can say, what's wrong about drinking the last LaCroix out of the fridge, right? Point is, you don't have to have an excuse or a reason for justifying your behavior. And here it's important to get curious when someone implies that you might have done something wrong, to get curious about why they think it's wrong, or why is it bad, or what's wrong with the thing that I did. Like, yeah, I did that thing, but what's wrong with it? Why is it bad? Okay, number 3. You have the right to judge if you are responsible for finding solutions to other people's problems. Other people are going to come to you with their problems all the time, and they're going to want you to solve them for them. And ultimately, it's up to you if you want to do that or not. You have a right to put yourself first. You are not responsible for other people's problems, and you don't need to feel guilty for deciding not to solve them, right? What else do we got here? You have a right to change your mind. Oftentimes people will want you to feel guilty for agreeing to something at one point and then later changing your mind. But that's ridiculous. New information will cause us to change our mind. We might agree to something under the pressure of the moment and later realize we actually didn't want to do that thing. We have a right to change our mind. And this is where perfectionism comes a little bit into play here. If you feel like you always need to be consistent and whenever you say you do something, you're going to do it, there's this kind of idea that you're not allowed to be imperfect. But that's not true. And you are allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to take in new information or take time to think about how you feel and say, you know what? I decided I actually don't want to do that thing anymore. And so I know it disappoints you, but I'm not going to do it. All right, number 5, you have the right to make mistakes and be responsible for them. Again, perfectionism. This idea that we can't fail, that we can't make mistakes, that we need to feel bad and guilty if we do make a mistake. But we are human, we all make mistakes, and we don't need to get offended or defensive when someone points it out either. If someone says, hey, you made this mistake, you can be like, you're right, I did make that mistake. That was foolish of me. I probably could do better. And I'll try to in the future. And we don't need to grovel and apologize and be like, oh no, I made this mistake, I'm so sorry. You're allowed to make mistakes. You do not need to be perfect. Okay. Number 6, you have the right to say, I don't know. If someone asks you if you want to do something, you can say, I don't know. I don't know. I need more information. I don't know. I need more time. I don't know. I have never thought about that. Right? You're allowed to say, I don't know. You don't need to, just because someone asks you a question, does not mean you need to respond to them with the information that you think they're looking for. There may be certain details that you do not want to reveal under certain circumstances or certain situations, and you're free to not volunteer any information that you don't want to volunteer. You can keep things to yourself. In fact, you probably should. And so, along with I don't know, you can just not answer their question. If someone says, hey, do you want to do this thing? You could be like, well, I need to think about it, right? So, number 6, you have the right to say, I don't know, but you also have the right to not respond to people's questions, again, presumably with the information that you think they're looking for. Okay. Number 7, you have the right to be independent of the goodwill of others before coping with them. Now, this is often the most confusing one, but what this means is you have the right to be independent of the goodwill of others. That means you don't need other people to like you. That's what that means. You have the right to be independent of the goodwill of others. That means you do not need people to like you. That means at work, you don't need someone to like with you. You don't need someone to like you in order to work with them and collaborate with them. Okay? And you have a right to be independent of the goodwill of others before coping with them. Before coping with them means before interacting with them and relating with them and working with them, right? So if someone doesn't like you, you can still work together. You can say things, you can request things, you can, in some cases, if you're a manager or a boss, demand things without being demanding, but you can say, this is a requirement, and you might not like it, but I still want you to do it, or I still need you to do it. And you can still get along just fine, even though they didn't like the thing that you just asked them to do, or they didn't like the thing you said about them. You do not need everyone to like you. Okay, number 8, you have the right to be illogical in making decisions. Just because someone offers you a logical reason to choose differently or act differently or behave differently, it doesn't matter. You're a human and you're allowed to act based on how you feel, based on how you want to act. You get to do what you want to do. You get to act on your own free will. It's pretty freaking awesome. And you're allowed to say, that's just what I want to do. That's just how I feel. You have that right. Okay? Number 9, you have a right to say, I don't understand. Oftentimes, people will make logical leaps in their arguments with you in order to manipulate your behavior. Again, this might be inadvertent because we're all taught this way, but someone might say something like, well, if you don't, let's say you were, your boss asked you to come into work or something, On the weekend, he might say, well, you're not going to come in. If you don't come in, then I guess I just can't rely on you anymore. Awesome guilt trip, boss. Thank you. You can say, I don't understand. It sounds like you won't think I'm a reliable employee anymore if I don't come in on my day off. And they might say, well, maybe not, but in the past, when I've asked you to come in on days off, you've always been reliable, and I guess I can't rely on you for that anymore. And you could be like, well, yeah, maybe you can't. Maybe you can, and maybe you can't. But if you call and you ask, I'll let you know if I can make it or not. So that's number 9. I don't understand. Number 10, you have the right to say, I don't care. So this is an interesting one. I would say, in many ways, you have a right not to care. And off the top of my head, I don't have a good example of when you might say, I don't care. Especially if the relationship is important to you. But again, as I said earlier, you're not responsible for other people's problems. You're also not responsible for other people's arbitrary beliefs about what's right and wrong. Again, so you can say, I don't care. Someone might say something like, if you don't come to my party this weekend, then everyone will think that you're not as cool as they thought you were. You'd be like, I don't care. If it really came to that, you might decide to let someone know specifically that you don't care. But the bottom line is that you don't have to care. You're not always required to care. If we were forced to care about every other person in the world, we just wouldn't have the capacity. We have access to so many different people through social media, especially that, if you cared about what everyone said in the comments section of your most recent Facebook post, you probably wouldn't have much time to do the things that are actually important to you in life. So these are the 10 assertive rights proposed by Manuel Smith, and basically have become a foundational part of assertiveness training worldwide. And the reason these rights are important is because they give us the freedom and the autonomy to, as I said before, be the ultimate judge of our own behavior. Now, in using these assertiveness rights, it's important that you try to integrate them internally into your being, but you don't try to force them upon other people. When you notice someone using manipulative behavior, let's say, for example, go back to number 4, you have the right to change your mind. If someone says, before, I don't get it, before, you said you were going to come to this thing, and now you're saying you're not, I don't get it. You might say, well, I have the right to change my mind. And people might get confused by this. The best thing to do is to know internally that you have the right to change your mind and say, well, that's just how it is. I decided to change my mind, and if I understand that might upset you, but this is what I've decided. Right? We can still be empathic with the people around us and understand that they're disappointed and let them know that we've made this different decision. But we don't want to go around like robotically reciting these 10 rights in front of people whenever they do something that violates those rights. Because ultimately that's, if you speak something as if it's an objective truth, people might wonder, people might disagree. People might wonder where you got this information. And the conversation turns into a debate about whether or not the statement that you made, I have a right to change my mind, is legitimate or not. But what cannot be disputed is the way you feel and your decisions, as long as you stand up for them. So again, by integrating the belief, I have the right to change my mind, and saying, hey, I understand that you're disappointed that I've decided to change my mind about this, but it's what I've decided, and I hope that we can continue to get along in the future and make plans in the future, but this time I just have decided to change my mind, right? So these are the 10 assertiveness rights that hopefully will help you learn to be more assertive. All right, that's it for today. I'm Kevin Hood. Lots of love.